from people who were nominated to the High Court. Unfortunately, what we see now is that there's really a Kagan double standard at issue here, because she refused to answer even some of the most basic questions. One of the most amusing was when Senator Cole asked her, "Why do you want to be a Supreme Court justice?" She didn't even answer that question. He had to keep going back to her and saying, "No, really, tell me something about, are you passionate about anything? Do you want, are you interested in this?" And he finally ended up saying, I'm just not getting answers from you. If you can't answer that question, what can you answer? When asked if she was a legal progressive, she said, "I'm not even sure what that term means. This is the dean of Harvard Law School. How can she not be familiar with the term progressivism and how it might apply in a legal context?" Incidentally, later in the day, she somehow remembered what legal progressivism was and was willing to admit that she was one. So that we've seen someone who is clearly not being straightforward and forthcoming about her opinions. Throughout the hearings, she acquainted herself more with Chief Justice John Roberts than with any other member of the court. This is exactly what we saw in Justice Sotomayor's hearings, who went through quoting Roberts and sounded basically exactly like him during the confirmation hearings. But now that she's on the court, what do we see? She votes consistently in lockstep with the liberal justices in the court in every case. So we have to be very careful to take with a grain of salt what we do here at these hearings. And if she's saying something that is at odds with her previous history, we need to really scrutinize her responses. A couple of specific topics on which Kagan has spoken, and actually we think we might have some information about. One is she was unwilling to recognize basically any limits on the government. Senator Coburn asked her, what if the Senate decided to make a law saying you had to eat 3 fruits and 3 vegetables every day? How about that? She'd said, well, she repeated the Supreme Court, it says Congress can't regulate under the Commerce Clause things that are non-economic activity. It's about commerce, right? And he said, yes, but what if I say that the government pays for 65% of healthcare costs? Eating fruits and vegetables lowers your healthcare costs, so it's economic. She said, she just kept on repeating, well, I would defer to the Congress on deciding whether something's economic or not. So what she basically said is, Congress can decide whether Congress can legislate on something, and as long as Congress can argue through whatever lengthy process it wants that something is economic, it could regulate what you eat for breakfast, it could regulate how many fruits and vegetables you have every day, and I think that clearly points to how she would vote on whether Obamacare and the health care mandate is constitutional. Another thing she was unwilling to take a stand on that should be truly striking to us is the Declaration of Independence. Senator Coburn again asked her, and he was specifically asking her about whether there's a fundamental right to bear arms. First of all, she has a great history of being anti-gun rights, and so certainly she wasn't willing to say there was a fundamental right to bear arms, which has led to the NRA opposing her nomination today, being willing to even score this vote against senators who will vote in favor of her. But not only did she say there's no fundamental right to bear arms, she said, I'm not sure there's fundamental rights at all. She was unwilling to go where the Declaration of Independence went, to say our rights aren't derived from the government, they're not just gifts of the government. We have pre-existing rights, God-given rights that the government has no authority to take away. So Elena Kagan is not on the side of Thomas Jefferson. Finally, we've seen some really striking actions of her in the pro-life context, because she was one of the front people in the Clinton administration working on the issue of partial birth abortion. In fact, she even succeeded in moving President Clinton from a position where he was interested in signing a ban on partial birth abortion to where he opposed the ban on partial birth abortion. And the way she did it is particularly interesting, because she not only was willing to bend the law to get where she goes, which we've seen in other areas, but she was willing to bend the facts in this case. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists had a expert opinion that they had sent a first draft of to the White House. Now that should give us pause in the first thing. Why are you bouncing your expert medical opinions off the White House? But they sent them a first draft, and she was very dissatisfied. So much so that she said, don't let the president see this, because it said, our expert panel says we know of no instance that a partial birth abortion will be necessary to save the life or health of the mother. Elena Kagan then wrote in some other options, and her text that was in her handwriting was then adopted, where it said, but there may be cases in which this would be necessary to save the life or health of the mother. And that text in the ACOG report is what courts for the next 10 years relied on in striking down partial birth abortion bans. When she was asked about this, she gave her typical answer. Senator Hatch was pressing her. Did you write this document? Is this your document? Finally, the farthest she was willing to go was to say, well, it was in my handwriting. This is not the kind of candid response. This is not even the kind of honest response we can expect from someone in any level of government, let alone someone for a life term on the Supreme Court. Elena Kagan is 50 years old. If she serves as long as Justice Stevens, who she's replacing, she will be on the court for 40 years. So this is a decision that will have more long-lasting impact than any presidential election, than any senatorial election, probably even than the oil spill that we're dealing with right now. Elections have consequences, we've heard so many times. Yes, they have the consequence that the president can nominate who he wants to the Supreme Court, but there's also elections to the Senate, and those have consequences. Because the Constitution says the senators have to vote to consent to a nominee. Please call your senator and encourage them to vote against Elena Kagan. Make their elections have a consequence. Thank you.